What if I told you that one of the most important lifelines of Russia, a multi-billion-dollar land bridge connecting Moscow to St. Petersburg, is suddenly gone? A link so critical that without it, trade, travel, and military logistics grind to a halt, leaving millions scrambling for answers. That's exactly what has just happened. And it's not just Russia that feels the shock. The entire world is now watching. To understand why this is such a big deal, let's take a step back. Moscow and St. Petersburg are more than just two Russian cities. They are the twin pillars of the country. Moscow is the beating heart of political power, while St. Petersburg is the window to Europe, the historic capital, and Russia's cultural jewel. Between them lies a land bridge, a corridor of highways, railways, and trade routes worth over $20 billion. For decades, it has been the artery that keeps Russia's northwestern region alive. Now imagine that artery being cut overnight. That's what Ukraine just did. Through a combination of military strikes, sabotage, and strategic pressure, Kiev has managed to choke the land bridge. Roads are blocked, trains stopped, and supply lines disrupted. The result? Chaos. Goods can't flow, fuel is stuck, and ordinary Russians are left wondering how such a thing could even happen. Why does this matter so much? Because Russia is a country that depends heavily on its internal infrastructure to survive. Unlike smaller nations, it cannot rely solely on sea routes or air connections. Land routes are the veins and arteries of the Russian state. And when one of the biggest is destroyed, it feels like a heart attack. But here's the bigger story. This isn't just about transportation. This is about war, power, and survival. For months, Ukraine has been targeting Russian logistics, fuel depots, rail lines, and bridges. Each strike chips away at Moscow's ability to project power. But shutting down the Moscow-St. Petersburg corridor? That's like cutting Russia in half. Trains carrying oil, coal, and food can't make the journey. Trucks filled with industrial goods are forced to take long detours, costing time and money. Factories in St. Petersburg, already struggling under Western sanctions, now face shortages. Even the Russian military, which relies on this link to move equipment, is feeling the pressure. And the panic is spreading. Videos are circulating online of long queues at gas stations in the region. Shelves in some supermarkets are starting to look empty. People are hoarding supplies, afraid the disruption could last weeks or even months. How did we get here? The answer lies in the geography. The land bridge connecting Moscow and St. Petersburg is vulnerable. It passes through stretches of territory close enough to Ukraine's reach, whether by drones, missiles, or sabotage teams. Ukraine has studied these weak spots carefully, waiting for the right moment. And when they struck, the effect was devastating. The Kremlin is scrambling. State media is calling it a temporary setback, but behind closed doors, officials know the scale of the disaster. Billions invested in infrastructure projects are now at risk. St. Petersburg, with its ports and industries, risks becoming isolated. Moscow, the capital, looks weaker by the day. But this story is not just about logistics. It's about symbolism. For centuries, the Moscow-St. Petersburg connection has been a symbol of Russia's unity and power. It was Peter the Great who built St. Petersburg to be Russia's European capital. It was the Tsars who connected the two cities with railroads in the 19th century. And it was the Soviet Union that poured billions into maintaining the corridor. Now, in 2025, that link is gone. Not by natural disaster, not by accident, but by deliberate action from Ukraine, a nation Russia once dismissed as weak and insignificant. Think about the psychological blow this deals to Moscow. For years, Putin has promised stability and strength. He has told Russians that their infrastructure is safe, their supply lines untouchable. Yet here we are, the second largest city in Russia cut off from its capital. And this is only part of the story. Because while Moscow tries to fix the damage, the ripple effects are spreading. The European Union is watching closely, seeing a weakened Russia more vulnerable than ever. NATO is analyzing the situation, noting how Ukraine has managed to strike at the very core of Russian logistics. Investors are pulling money out of Russia, fearing deeper instability. But the biggest impact is at home. Millions of Russians are angry, scared, and confused. In St. Petersburg, protests are starting to simmer. In Moscow, questions are being whispered. How could this happen? And who is to blame? This land bridge was never just concrete and steel. It was the symbol of Russia's ability to hold itself together. And now, with it gone, the cracks in Putin's system are becoming impossible to hide. So the question now is, can Russia rebuild, or is this the beginning of a much bigger unraveling? Because when a $20 billion lifeline vanishes overnight, the consequences are never small. And as we'll see in the next part, this is not just about transportation. It's about the very survival of Russia as we know it. The collapse of the land bridge has done more than disrupt logistics. It has exposed how fragile Russia's economic lifelines truly are. For decades, Moscow boasted that its infrastructure could withstand pressure, that its railways and highways would keep the nation connected no matter what. But this illusion has cracked, and the consequences ripple far beyond the asphalt and steel of the destroyed route. Consider the sheer scale of the economic fallout. The $20 billion project was more than just a road. It was a statement of power. It linked two of Russia's most vital cities, Moscow, the political heart, and St. Petersburg, the cultural and industrial hub. Every day, thousands of trucks carried goods across it. Food supplies, industrial equipment, oil, and natural gas derivatives. Cutting this artery is like cutting a vein in a giant's arm. The flow of life is disrupted, and the damage is immediate. Reports from inside Russia paint a picture of chaos. Supermarkets in St. Petersburg are seeing shelves go empty. Manufacturers complain of missing parts. Construction sites grind to a halt as materials fail to arrive. Prices for basic goods spike overnight, and inflationary pressures, already heavy from sanctions, become unbearable. Ordinary Russians, who once thought the war in Ukraine was something distant, suddenly feel it in their wallets and dinner tables. And that's why millions are panicking. But the story doesn't stop there. This land bridge wasn't just about Russia's domestic economy. It was also about Moscow's ambitions to keep St. Petersburg positioned as a crucial gateway to Europe. Through its ports, Russia exported oil, gas, fertilizers, and metals to the world. By severing the bridge, Ukraine hasn't only hurt Russian consumers. It has cut into Moscow's ability to project power and wealth abroad. And let's not forget the military dimension. That road was not just for commerce. It was also a strategic lifeline for the Russian armed forces. Armored vehicles, ammunition, fuel, and soldiers moved along that corridor toward the northwestern front. With the bridge gone, resupply becomes more complicated. Convoys must take detours, stretching routes by hundreds of kilometers, burning more fuel, and exposing themselves to further Ukrainian attacks. Every extra hour spent on the road increases the risk of ambushes and drone strikes. This is where Ukraine's brilliance shines through. Kiev's forces knew they couldn't match Russia tank for tank or jet for jet. But by studying the map, they realized that infrastructure, roads, bridges, rail lines, was Russia's Achilles heel. Hit the roads, and you don't just damage concrete, you damage Moscow's ability to wage war. And that's exactly what happened. What makes this defeat particularly painful for Russia is how public it is. The Kremlin built the land bridge as a symbol of pride. Russian state TV showcased it as proof that Moscow could overcome Western sanctions, boasting that it was a marvel of engineering and a sign of strength. But now the images flooding social media show the opposite. Twisted steel, broken concrete, long lines of stranded trucks, and angry citizens demanding answers. The propaganda has backfired. Instead of pride, there is humiliation. Instead of confidence, there is doubt. And the timing could not be worse. The Russian economy is already straining under sanctions. Factories lack components. Export revenues have shrunk. The ruble has weakened. And now, with this bridge gone, another layer of pressure falls onto the system. International investors, already wary, see instability growing. Neighbors like Finland and the Baltic states watch closely, reassured that Russia is not as invincible as it pretends. For Ukraine, this is not just a tactical victory. It is a psychological one. Every successful strike on Russia's infrastructure sends a message, not only to Moscow, but also to the rest of the world. Ukraine is resilient, resourceful, and capable of striking where it matters most. And this morale boost is invaluable. But let's pause here and think about the ordinary people. The millions of Russians who wake up to find prices soaring, jobs disappearing, and futures uncertain. They are now asking questions that the Kremlin does not want to answer. Why, after trillions of rubles spent on the military, can't the government even protect its own vital roads? Why, after promising stability, is life becoming harder every single day? These questions are dangerous for leaders who survive on the image of control. Behind the scenes, whispers of blame spread. Some accuse military commanders of negligence. Others point to corruption, corners cut during construction, funds stolen, maintenance neglected. Whatever the truth, the perception is clear. Russia has lost face, and the myth of invulnerability has been shattered. And the panic is not limited to civilians. Inside the Kremlin, officials scramble to find solutions. Emergency funds are rushed to repair crews. Alternative transport routes are proposed. But rebuilding will take months, perhaps even years. And during that time, Ukraine will not sit idle. Every attempt to restore the bridge risks being struck again. It becomes a game of cat and mouse, with Russia trying to patch the wound while Ukraine keeps tearing it open. This brings us to the larger geopolitical picture. Russia's enemies see opportunity. The European Union, which has long sought to cut dependence on Russian goods, now sees confirmation that Moscow's supply chains are fragile. NATO, monitoring the disruption of military logistics, strengthens its confidence that Russia can be contained. Even countries that once hesitated to side openly with Ukraine notice that Moscow can be challenged and defeated in ways that once seemed impossible. And what about Asia? China, Russia's so-called no-limits partner, is watching carefully. Beijing has relied on Moscow for cheap energy and as a geopolitical ally against the West. But this disruption shows that Russia may not be the stable partner China hoped for. If Ukraine can cause this much chaos with one strike, what does that say about Russia's long-term reliability? Doubts creep in, and those doubts weaken Moscow's position on the world stage. But perhaps the most telling part of the story is how it has changed the perception of Ukraine itself. For months, critics said Ukraine was on the defensive, struggling to hold territory. But this operation proves otherwise. Kiev is not just surviving, it is shaping the battlefield, striking Russia where it hurts, and rewriting the narrative of the war. In doing so, Ukraine has shown smaller nations everywhere that asymmetric strategy, brains over brute force, can change the course of history. So where does this leave us? The land bridge is gone, the $20 billion project reduced to rubble, and millions of lives disrupted. Russia faces shortages, inflation, and humiliation. Ukraine celebrates a symbolic and strategic victory. And the world takes note that the balance of power is shifting in ways few imagined just a year ago. But the story is not finished. The question now is whether Russia can adapt, whether it can rebuild, or whether this marks the beginning of deeper unraveling. Because make no mistake, a broken road can lead to a broken economy, and a broken economy can lead to political upheaval. History is filled with empires that looked strong until a single fracture revealed how fragile they really were. In the coming weeks, the battle will not just be fought with weapons, but with concrete, steel, and supply chains. Russia will pour resources into restoring its lifeline, while Ukraine will search for new ways to disrupt. Each move will be watched by millions, and each outcome will carry consequences that stretch far beyond the battlefield. And that is why this moment matters. The destruction of a single bridge may seem like one event in a long war. But it is more than that. It is a symbol of shifting power, of vulnerability exposed, of ordinary people waking up to the reality that no government can shield them from the consequences of reckless decisions. Moscow wanted the land bridge to be a monument to strength. Instead, it has become a monument to weakness. And as Ukraine seizes the momentum, the world must ask, if Russia cannot protect its own heartland, How long can it sustain its ambitions abroad?